They thought she was just a cleaning lady, but 50 military working dogs recognized her before any human ever did. The savage chorus of 50 military working dogs shattered the morning silence at Naval Special Warfare Canine Training Facility. Their barking rose and fell like waves crashing against steel and concrete, a symphony of aggression that had broken stronger souls than the small woman standing at the main gate. Chief Petty Officer Derek Vance grabbed a push broom from the supply cart and hurled it at the ground. The wooden handle cracked against the concrete, skidding to a stop inches from her worn sneakers. "Pick it up." The woman, Ivory Lawson, according to the thin application folder tucked under his arm, didn't flinch. She stood perhaps 5'3", maybe 115 pounds, soaking wet. Her faded gray jacket hung loose on narrow shoulders, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes cast downward like she'd spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation. Derek stepped forward, his combat boots grinding the broom handle into the pavement. Behind him, Lieutenant Amber Nash uncrossed her arms long enough to check her manicure. Petty Officer First Class Caleb Reeves let out a low whistle that carried across the training yard. The entire K-9 unit, 15 handlers strong, had gathered to watch their Monday morning entertainment unfold. "I asked you a question." Derek's shadow fell across her face. "You know what your job is here?" Ivory nodded once, still silent. "Cleaning. Kennels." He pronounced each word like she might be hard of hearing. 50 dogs, every single day. You understand what that means?" Another small nod. Amber Nash sauntered closer, her lieutenant's bars gleaming in the Virginia Beach sunlight. "Derek, I don't think she speaks English. Maybe we should get a translator." She tilted her head, studying Ivory like something unpleasant stuck to her boot. "Where exactly did HR find this one?" "Civilian contractor pool," Derek answered, without taking his eyes off the new hire. "Bottom of the barrel, apparently." Laughter rippled through the assembled handlers. Petty Officer Second Class Mason Briggs pulled out his phone, angling for a better shot of the humiliation in progress. Ivory bent down and picked up the broom. "Good girl." Derek's lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Now, you'll start with Alpha Block. That's where we keep our most enthusiastic residents." He pointed toward a row of reinforced kennels where Belgian Malinois paced behind steel mesh, their amber eyes tracking every movement. "Oh, and a friendly warning. The last janitor lost 2 fingers to Rex. He's the big one at the end. Black muzzle, likes to play." Ivory's gaze flickered toward Alpha Block for a fraction of a second. Then she adjusted her grip on the broom handle and started walking. No protest, no questions, no fear in her eyes that anyone could detect. Derek exchanged a glance with Amber. $20 says she doesn't last till lunch." "I give her an hour," Caleb called out. "Rex hates everybody." Master Sergeant Silas Turner stood apart from the group, leaning against the equipment shed with his arms folded. At 53, he'd been handling military working dogs longer than most of these pups had been alive. His weathered face revealed nothing as he watched the small woman walk toward Alpha Block, but something in his posture shifted, something that looked almost like a tension. The barking intensified as Ivory approached the first kennel. A massive German shepherd threw itself against the chain link, foam gathering at the corners of its mouth. The noise was deafening, a wall of sound designed to break the human spirit. Ivory kept walking. Second kennel, third, fourth. Each dog more aggressive than the last, each barrier rattling under the assault of powerful bodies and sharper teeth. Then she reached Rex. The Belgian Malinois was everything Derek had promised, and worse. 85 pounds of muscle and malice, bred from a lineage that traced back to the first DevGru combat dogs. His record included 3 handler injuries, 2 escape attempts, and 1 incident that remained classified at levels most people didn't know existed. Rex launched himself at the kennel door the moment Ivory's shadow crossed his territory. His bark was different from the others, deeper, more guttural, a sound that spoke of violence barely contained. And then it stopped. Rex's front paws hit the ground, his massive head tilted to one side. The perpetual growl died in his throat, replaced by something no one at the facility had ever witnessed. Silence. The dog sat down, ears flattened against his skull. Tail, a tail that had never wagged for anyone in 4 years of service, began a slow, uncertain sweep across the concrete floor. Ivory paused, just for a heartbeat. Then she continued toward the supply closet at the end of the row, leaving Rex staring after her with an expression that could only be described as recognition. "What the—" Derek's voice trailed off. Amber stepped closer to the kennel, her heels clicking against the pavement. Rex immediately lunged at the barrier, teeth bared, that familiar murderous intent restored in full. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. Must be wearing some kind of pheromone spray, Caleb suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Or maybe Rex is finally going soft. Silas Turner said nothing, but his eyes hadn't left Ivory since she'd picked up that broom, and the furrow between his brows had deepened into something approaching genuine curiosity. The morning crawled forward in a haze of bleach and animal waste. Ivory moved through Alpha Block with methodical efficiency, cleaning each kennel without incident while the handlers watched from a safe distance. Every dog she approached went quiet. Every snarl died before it fully formed. It was as if she carried some invisible shield that the animals could sense but the humans could not comprehend. Mason Briggs got bored around 0900 hours. He'd been assigned to shadow the new janitor, Derek's orders, but watching someone shovel waste wasn't exactly stimulating entertainment. When Ivory entered the last kennel in Alpha Block to clean around the water basin, Mason saw his opportunity. The lock clicked shut with a satisfying metallic snap. He walked away whistling, phone already in hand to text the good news to the group chat. Inside the kennel, Ivory straightened. The dog occupying this space was named Titan, a German shepherd with a bite force that had been measured at 430 pounds per square inch and a temperament that had resulted in his removal from active deployment. He was, according to every evaluation on file, impossible to rehabilitate. Titan rose from his corner, hackles raised, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that could crush bone like kindling. Ivory set down her brush. She turned to face him, her movements slow and deliberate. No fear flickered across her features, no panic quickened her breath. She simply looked at the dog the way one might regard an old friend encountered after years apart. Titan advanced. 1 step, 2. His growl filled the enclosed space like thunder. Ivory didn't retreat, didn't speak. She lowered herself into a crouch, making herself smaller, less threatening. Her eyes met Titan's directly, a challenge in canine terms, a declaration. The German shepherd lunged and stopped. His muzzle was inches from her throat when something in his brain overrode every trained instinct. The growl faded. The tension bled from his massive frame. Titan whined once, a sound of confusion and something deeper, then sank to his belly and laid his head across Ivory's knee. 10 feet away, hidden behind the equipment rack, Fern Cooper watched with her hand pressed over her mouth. The veterinary technician had been on her way to administer Titan's weekly supplements when she'd spotted Mason Briggs locking the kennel door with someone still inside. By the time she'd found the emergency keys, she'd expected to walk in on a tragedy. Instead, she found a miracle. "How did you—" Fern's voice came out barely above a whisper. "He's never let anyone touch him. Not in 3 years." Ivory looked up, her expression unchanged. "He's not angry. He's scared. There's a difference." She rose smoothly to her feet, gave Titan a brief scratch behind the ear, and collected her cleaning supplies. The dog watched her go with those intelligent amber eyes, tail thumping against the concrete in a rhythm that matched something ancient and instinctual. Fern fumbled with the kennel door. "I should report what happened. Mason can't just—" "Please don't." The 2 words stopped Fern mid-sentence. Not because of their volume, Ivory had spoken so softly the syllables barely carried, but because of what lay beneath them. An exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor. A resignation that spoke of battles fought in arenas far beyond this training facility. "I'm just here to do a job," Ivory continued, already walking toward the next block. Nothing more. Fern watched her go, questions multiplying with every step the stranger took. Questions she suspected wouldn't have easy answers. Commander Raymond Hayes received the morning's incident report at 11:32. He read it twice, then summoned Derek Vance to his office with a single terse message: "Get up here, now." The commander's office occupied the 2nd floor of the administration building, overlooking the main training yard where handlers were running their dogs through obstacle courses. Hayes stood at the window with his back to the door when Derek entered. "Explain to me," Hayes said without turning around, "why we have a civilian contractor with no background in animal handling, no security clearance beyond basic, and no apparent qualifications being locked in kennels with dogs that have been flagged for behavioral rehabilitation." Derek's jaw tightened. "Sir, I wasn't aware, you weren't aware that Petty Officer Briggs decided to turn a woman's first day of employment into some kind of hazing ritual." Hayes finally turned, his gray eyes cold enough to frost glass. "Or you weren't aware that I would find out." "Sir, the kennel incident was a liability, a potential lawsuit, and most importantly, a distraction from the real work this facility is supposed to be conducting." Hayes moved to his desk, picking up a thin folder. "Ivory Lawson, applied through the standard civilian contractor pool. References check out. Former cleaning jobs, nothing remarkable. HR approved her 3 days ago. Sir, with respect, there's something off about her. The dogs, what about them? Derek hesitated. Putting his suspicions into words felt foolish, like admitting to believing in ghosts. They respond to her, all of them. Even Rex, even Titan. It's not natural. Hayes studied the folder in his hands. Have you considered the possibility that she simply has experience with animals that didn't make it onto her application? I've considered a lot of possibilities, sir. Consider this one instead. Hayes closed the folder with a snap. She has a 1-week trial period. If she causes problems, we terminate the contract. If she doesn't, we leave her alone and focus on the Pentagon evaluation coming up. Are we clear? Crystal, sir. Derek left the commander's office with his shoulders tight and his mind racing. Something about that woman didn't add up. The way she moved, the way she held herself. The absolute absence of fear when any sane person would have been terrified. He'd seen that kind of stillness before, in operators coming back from deployments they couldn't talk about, in veterans who'd left pieces of themselves in places that didn't appear on any map. But that was impossible. She was a janitor, a nobody, wasn't she? Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has been watching. Right now, 73% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more military content like this, take 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow, and you won't miss any new uploads. Now, let's get back to Ivory and those 50 military dogs who seem to know something nobody else does. The second day dawned gray and cold, a front moving in from the Atlantic that turned the training yard into a wind tunnel of misery. Ivory arrived at 0600 hours, before any of the handlers had finished their first cup of coffee. She was halfway through Bravo Block when she found the injured dog. Kaiser was a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois with a service record that included 2 overseas deployments and a reputation for flawless aggression. He was also currently favoring his right front leg, a trickle of blood staining the concrete beneath his paw. Ivory set down her mop, knelt beside the kennel door. Kaiser watched her with wary eyes, that instinctive canine suspicion, warring with something else, something that told him this human was different. "Easy," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Let me see." The kennel door wasn't locked during cleaning hours. Ivory pushed it open slowly, giving Kaiser every opportunity to object. Instead, the dog limped forward and presented his injured paw like a patient arriving at a doctor's office. The wound was a deep laceration, probably from catching his foot on a jagged edge of the fence during training. Left untreated, it would become infected within days. Ivory examined it with fingers that moved with practiced precision, probing the edges of the cut while Kaiser whimpered softly. From her jacket pocket, she produced a small first aid kit. Standard civilian issue, nothing remarkable. But the way she cleaned the wound, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and wrapped the sterile gauze around Kaiser's paw was anything but standard. Her hands worked with the muscle memory of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Thousands. Her technique was textbook military field dressing, the kind taught in special operations medical courses that took months to complete. Fern Cooper arrived with Kaiser's morning supplements and found the tableau. Small woman, large dog, immaculate bandage that would have made any combat medic proud. "Where did you learn to do that?" The question escaped before Fern could stop it. Ivory didn't look up from securing the final strip of tape. "YouTube. That's not a YouTube bandage. Must have been a good video." Ivory rose, collected her supplies, and moved toward the next kennel. "His wound should be checked by a vet. It's deep but clean." Fern stared at the bandage, at Kaiser, who had already settled into a comfortable position with his injured leg extended, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, at the retreating figure of a woman who supposedly knew nothing about animal care. "Wait," Fern called out. "At least tell me your name, your real name." Ivory paused at the kennel door. For a moment, something flickered across her features. A shadow of a smile, perhaps, or just a trick of the gray morning light. "Ivory works fine." She was gone before Fern could ask another question. The training exercise that afternoon was supposed to be routine. Handler evaluation drills, conducted every quarter to ensure the dogs and their partners maintained peak operational readiness. Lieutenant Amber Nash was coordinating, which meant everything had to run on schedule and look impressive for the reports she'd be filing. The scenario was straightforward. Simulated hostile engagement in the urban warfare mock-up that occupied the facility's eastern sector. 2-story buildings made of plywood and concrete, street layouts designed to replicate Middle Eastern architecture. Target dummies wired to pop up and fall down on command. Caleb Reeves was running point with Shadow, a German shepherd he'd been handling for 18 months. Their job was to clear the first building, locate the hostage dummy on the second floor, and signal the all clear. Standard stuff for any experienced K9 team. What nobody expected was the pyrotechnic malfunction. The flashbang simulators were supposed to produce light and noise without actual explosive force. Training aids, nothing more. But somewhere in the maintenance chain, someone had loaded a device with an incorrect charge. When it detonated 6 feet from Caleb's position, the concussive wave sent him sprawling backward, disoriented and temporarily deafened. Shadow's training held, barely. The dog froze in place, awaiting commands that weren't coming from his handler's ringing ears. What happened next would be debated for weeks. Ivory had been cleaning windows on the administration building's second floor. She had a clear sight line to the training mock-up. When the explosion rippled through the morning air, she didn't hesitate. By the time anyone else had processed what was happening, she was already moving. Not running, that would have been too obvious, but flowing through the facility with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her size. She reached the mock-up perimeter in under 30 seconds, slipping past the safety barriers while the safety officers were still fumbling for their radios. Inside the building, Caleb was trying to stand. Blood trickled from his left ear. His balance was shot, inner ear scrambled by the pressure wave. Shadow whined and circled, torn between protecting his handler and completing the mission parameters burned into his training. Ivory appeared in the doorway like smoke. "Don't move," she said, her voice cutting through the ringing in Caleb's ears with surprising clarity. "You're concussed. Moving will make it worse." How did you? Your dog is confused. He needs a handler command or he'll default to protect mode. She crouched beside Caleb, fingers checking his pulse, pupils, responsiveness. Give him the stand-down signal. Caleb's hand moved almost unconsciously, forming the gesture he had practiced thousands of times. Shadow immediately dropped into a sitting position, tongue lolling, the anxiety draining from his posture. "Good." Ivory rose. "Medical team will be here in 90 seconds. You're going to be fine." She was gone before he could ask her name, before he could ask how a cleaning lady knew anything about concussion assessment or canine command protocols, before he could process the fact that her hands, during those brief moments of examination, had moved with the efficiency of someone who'd treated combat injuries in the field. Caleb replayed the moment in his memory as the medics loaded him onto a stretcher. The way she'd spoken, the certainty in her eyes, the complete absence of panic when any civilian should have been fleeing from explosions, not running toward them. He didn't share his suspicions with anyone, not yet. But when they released him from medical observation with a clean bill of health, the first thing he did was find Derek Vance. "We need to talk," Caleb said, "about the janitor." Evening fell over the facility like a weighted blanket, the kind of darkness that seemed to absorb sound. Most of the handlers had gone home or retreated to the barracks. The dogs had been fed and settled. Only the security patrols moved through the compound, their footsteps echoing off concrete and steel. Ivory was cleaning the main training building when Mason Briggs found her. "Hey!" He blocked the doorway, arms crossed, that smirk from the first morning back in full force. "Heard you played hero today, running into explosions, playing doctor with Reeves," she continued mopping. "I was nearby. Anyone would have helped." "See, that's the thing." Mason stepped closer. "Not just anyone would have known what to do. Not just anyone would have moved like you did." The mop stopped its rhythmic motion. Ivory looked up, and for the first time, Mason saw something in her eyes that made his confidence waver. Something old and tired and entirely without patience. "What do you want, petty officer?" "I want to know who you really are. I'm the cleaning lady. You made that very clear yesterday when you locked me in with Titan." Mason's jaw tightened. "That was just hazing, I know." She resumed mopping. "Shouldn't you be getting ready for the evaluation tomorrow? I understand the Pentagon team is quite particular about protocol." How did she know about the Pentagon evaluation? The information hadn't been shared with civilian contractors. Mason's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, the lights flickered. A siren split the night. The compound alarm, 3 short blasts followed by 1 long, echoed off every building. Perimeter breach, eastern fence line. Mason's training kicked in automatically. He sprinted for the armory, Ivory forgotten in the sudden case of boots pounding and dogs barking, and radios crackling with urgent commands. Within minutes, the facility transformed into a controlled hurricane of activity. Handlers retrieved their dogs. Security teams deployed to the breach point. Floodlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh artificial day. Commander Hayes coordinated from the operations center, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through every channel. "I want eyes on the eastern perimeter. Now. Who triggered the sensor?" The answer came back confused, contradictory. Motion detected, but no visual confirmation. Thermal cameras showed nothing. The breach had either been a malfunction or something capable of moving without generating a heat signature. While the security team searched the fence line, nobody noticed Ivory Lawson standing alone at the edge of Alpha Block. Her eyes tracked the darkness beyond the floodlights. Her posture shifted subtly into something that didn't look anything like a cleaning lady. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small object, a challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling. The design was impossible to make out in the darkness, but her thumb traced its contours like a prayer. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the coin vanished back into her pocket. Ivory retrieved her mop and bucket and walked toward the supply closet, just another invisible worker beneath notice while warriors responded to threats she wasn't supposed to understand. The Eastern Perimeter incident was declared a sensor malfunction by morning, but the dogs knew better. Every canine in Alpha Block had gone silent during those 37 minutes. Not the aggressive silence of a hunt, but the alert stillness of recognition, as if they were waiting, watching, protecting something no human had thought to identify. Day 3 brought clouds that hung low enough to touch, and with them came Lieutenant Amber Nash's renewed determination to put the janitor in her place. "Vance tells me you have experience with animal handling," Amber announced, intercepting Ivory on her way to the supply closet. Two junior handlers flanked the lieutenant, their expressions conveying equal parts curiosity and anticipation. "Funny thing to leave off your application," Ivory kept her eyes down. "I've had pets, nothing professional." "Pets," Amber laughed, a sharp sound without warmth. "Is that what you call what happened with Kaiser's bandage? Or the way you handled Shadow's handler during the explosion yesterday? I was trying to help." "Help." The word dripped with disdain. "You're a cleaning contractor, Lawson. Your job is to clean. Leave the heroics to people who know what they're doing." Ivory nodded, the motion small and acquiescent. Anyone watching would have seen a woman accepting her place in the hierarchy. Silas Turner, observing from the shadow of the equipment shed, saw something else entirely. He saw the slight adjustment of her stance when Amber stepped too close, the way her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, the absolute stillness that spoke of coiled potential, waiting to be released. He'd seen that posture before, in the mirror 30 years ago, before the first deployment, before he'd learned what it meant to carry invisible weights no civilian could understand. The training demonstration that afternoon was designed to showcase the facility's elite teams for a group of visiting congressional staffers. Derek Vance had been preparing for weeks, coordinating with the Public Affairs Office to ensure maximum positive coverage. The demonstration opened with basic obedience drills, dogs responding to verbal and hand signals with mechanical precision. Then came the impressive stuff: obstacle courses, protection scenarios, and finally, the piece de resistance, a simulated building assault that would demonstrate the tactical value of military working dogs in modern combat operations. The congressional staffers sat in a covered reviewing stand, sipping coffee and nodding at appropriate moments while their assistants took notes. Commander Hayes stood nearby, offering commentary with the practiced ease of someone who'd briefed politicians before. Everything was proceeding according to plan until Caleb Reeves brought out Shadow for the detection demonstration. The scenario required Shadow to locate a hidden, explosive device, actually a training aid scented with specific compounds, within a mock building interior. Standard stuff, rehearsed dozens of times. Shadow would find the target, alert his handler, and everyone would applaud the miracle of canine detection. Shadow found the target in under 40 seconds. But instead of alerting to Caleb, the dog turned his head toward a figure standing at the back of the crowd. Ivory. The German Shepherd whined once, then broke from his handler's control and trotted directly toward the cleaning lady, who had somehow ended up in proximity to a high-profile demonstration. "Shadow, heel!" Caleb's command cut through the stunned silence. The dog ignored him. Shadow stopped in front of Ivory and sat. His tail wagged. His eyes never left her face. And then, with the careful precision of a canine who had been trained to detect specific chemical signatures, he pressed his nose against her jacket pocket. The pocket where she'd hidden the challenge coin the night before. The pocket that apparently carried traces of something Shadow's sophisticated nose could identify. Amber Nash recovered first. "Well, this is embarrassing. Apparently, our detection dog has developed an attraction to cleaning products." Scattered, uncomfortable laughter from the congressional staffers. Caleb hurried forward to retrieve Shadow, his face flushed with humiliation. Commander Hayes stepped in with a smooth redirect, launching into an explanation of how sensitive the dog's noses could be to unfamiliar scents. But Silas Turner wasn't looking at the politicians, or the embarrassed handler, or even the dog. He was watching Ivory's hand. Just for a moment, so brief it could have been imagination, her fingers had pressed against that jacket pocket, a protective gesture, a reflex. What was she hiding in there that a military detection dog would alert to? More importantly, why did she have it in the first place? The fallout from the Shadow incident was contained but consequential. Derek Vance pulled Ivory aside after the congressional delegation departed, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said, "but it ends now. I'm not playing any. The dogs follow you around like lost puppies. You appear out of nowhere during explosions. Detection dogs alert on you during demonstrations." His finger jabbed toward her chest, stopping just short of contact. "You're going to tell me the truth, or I'm going to have security escort you off this facility permanently." Ivory met his eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, something changed in the space between them. Derek had spent his career reading people, body language, micro-expressions, the 1,000 tiny signals that separated threats from allies, predators from prey. What he saw in Ivory's gaze didn't fit any category he recognized. Not fear, not defiance, not even the desperate calculation of someone caught in a lie. What he saw was patience, the infinite, unshakable patience of someone who had faced down worse enemies than a posturing petty officer and emerged on the other side intact. "I'm here to clean kennels," Ivory said quietly. "That's all I'm willing to discuss." She walked away before he could respond, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Derek let her go. That night, he started making calls. Chief Warrant Officer Ezra Dalton was the facility's intelligence liaison, responsible for background checks and personnel security. When Derek requested a deep dive on Ivory Lawson, Ezra raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. The initial search returned exactly what the application had promised: previous employment at commercial cleaning services, a residential address in Norfolk, credit history unremarkable, social security number valid, tax records in order. Then Ezra tried to access the federal database. "That's strange." He frowned at his monitor, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "What?" Derek leaned closer. "Her record, it's locked." Ezra typed another sequence, another denial. "Hold on. Let me try a different approach." More typing, more access codes. The screen flickered twice, then displayed a message neither man had ever seen before. "Access denied. Classified level 5. Further inquiries will be logged and reported. Contact DIA Special Operations Division." Ezra sat back slowly. "Level 5. That's not supposed to be possible for a civilian." "What does it mean?" "It means her real file exists somewhere that I can't reach. It means someone with a lot of stars on their shoulders decided her information was too sensitive for standard military databases." Ezra looked up at Derek, his expression troubled. "It means either she's a spy or she's the exact opposite of a spy. You're going to have to be more specific. I'm saying that Level 5 classification is reserved for active special operations personnel and their covers. Deep cover. The kind of people who don't exist on paper because their existence would compromise national security." Derek stared at the flashing denial message on the screen. His mind raced through possibilities, each more improbable than the last. "A janitor," he said finally, his voice hollow. "We've been harassing a janitor for 3 days." "Maybe," Ezra's fingers hovered over the keyboard, "or maybe we've been harassing someone who chose to become a janitor. Big difference." The question was why. Why would anyone with Level 5 clearance, with access to resources and positions most people only read about in novels, choose to scrub kennels at a canine training facility? Unless this facility had something she wanted, unless 50 military working dogs weren't just animals to her, unless they were something else entirely. Morning 4 arrived with Commander Hayes receiving a phone call that changed everything. Ezra Dalton's inquiries had triggered automatic notifications up the chain of command. By 0800, Hayes was on a secure line with someone at the Pentagon who spoke in the clipped gospel of classified briefings. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Hayes sat motionless at his desk for a long time, staring at the training yard below his window, at the woman in the faded gray jacket pushing a cleaning cart toward Alpha Block like she had every day that week. He reached for his phone and dialed Derek Vance's extension. "The investigation into Lawson stops now," he said without preamble. "Sir, we found something. Her records are—" "I know what her records are, and I know what happens to people who keep digging into things they're not supposed to find." Hayes paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Leave her alone, Chief. Whatever she's doing here, it's above our pay grade. With respect, sir, I have a responsibility to this facility. Your responsibility is to prepare for tomorrow's Pentagon evaluation. Nothing else. Am I clear?" The line went dead before Derek could argue. He stood in his office, phone still pressed to his ear, confusion and frustration warring across his features. Behind him, through the window, Ivory Lawson had stopped walking. She was kneeling beside Rex's kennel, one hand pressed flat against the chain-link fence. The notorious Belgian Malinois was pressed against the barrier from the inside, his nose touching her palm through the metal mesh. Neither of them moved. From a distance, it looked almost like a reunion, like a homecoming. We're at the halfway point of this story, and I have to say, the mystery is just getting started. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me who you think Ivory really is. I read every single comment, and your theories might just inspire the next story. Also, if you're enjoying this video, hit that like button to let me know, and it helps more people discover these military stories. Now, let's get back to the truth. Everyone at this facility is about to discover. The annual Pentagon evaluation arrived with all the subtlety of a military parade. 3 black SUVs pulled through the main gate at 0900 sharp, depositing a delegation that included 2 colonels, a naval captain, a civilian analyst, and, to everyone's surprise, a 3-star admiral whose presence had not been announced in advance. Admiral Solomon Blake stepped onto the pavement with the measured confidence of a man who'd spent 4 decades climbing the ranks of naval special warfare. His chest bore enough ribbons to wallpaper a small room. His keen eyes, pale blue and unsettling, swept across the assembled facility staff like targeting lasers. "Quite a reception," he remarked to Commander Hayes. "I don't remember requesting a parade. Sir, we weren't expecting—" "That's the point, Commander." The Admiral's attention had already moved on, cataloging details, filing observations. "I prefer to see things as they actually are, not as they're presented." Gunnery Sergeant Logan Pierce emerged from the 3rd SUV, a Marine Corps liaison whose presence suggested this evaluation carried weight beyond routine inspection. He carried a tablet and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. The morning's scheduled demonstrations proceeded with the precision of a Swiss watch. Obstacle courses cleared, detection scenarios completed, basic obedience executed flawlessly. Commander Hayes narrated from the reviewing stand while his handlers performed with the desperation of soldiers who knew their careers depended on every detail. It was during the attack dog demonstration that everything began to unravel. Derek Vance was coordinating the exercise, a simulated hostile engagement in which Rex would pursue and detain a volunteer wearing protective equipment. The scenario had been rehearsed exhaustively, every variable accounted for, every contingency planned. Every contingency except the one that actually happened. The volunteer was a young ensign named Peters, selected because he could run fast and knew how to fall safely when 85 pounds of Belgian Malinois slammed into his back. He took his position at the far end of the training yard, raised his padded arm as the target, and waited for the signal. Derek released Rex with the attack command. The dog launched like a missile, covering ground with terrifying speed. Peters braced himself, weight forward, ready to absorb the impact. Then Rex veered. Not toward Peters, not toward the designated target at all. The Belgian Malinois changed direction mid-stride, his powerful legs churning as he accelerated toward the spectator area, toward the cleaning lady standing at the edge of the crowd with her mop and bucket. "Rex! High IR! Stop!" Derek's commands bounced off the dog like rain off armor. Rex had never disobeyed a direct order in 4 years of service, had never broken pursuit once locked onto a target, had never shown the slightest deviation from his programming, until now. The dog reached Ivory at full speed and did something that made every handler in attendance question their sanity. He stopped, sat, pressed his massive head against her leg, and whined. The sound that emerged from Rex was nothing like the aggressive vocalization they had all heard 1,000 times. This was the whimper of a child finding a lost parent, the cry of recognition that transcended training, conditioning, and 4 years of carefully cultivated violence. Admiral Blake rose from his chair. His expression had transformed from polite boredom to something much more intense. "Commander Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent training yard. "Who is that woman?" Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but Derek Vance was already moving. The embarrassment of having his dog malfunction during a Pentagon evaluation had curdled into rage. He crossed the distance to Ivory in seconds, grabbed her shoulder, and spun her around to face him. "What did you do to my dog?" "Nothing. Don't give me that." His grip tightened. First Titan, then Kaiser, then Shadow, now Rex. Every dog on this facility responds to you like you're some kind of... "Chief Vance," Admiral Blake's voice cracked like a whip. "Release that woman immediately." Derek's hand dropped reflexively. He turned to face the Admiral, confusion warring with the instinct to obey that had been drilled into him since basic training. Blake descended from the reviewing stand, his movements deliberate. The other members of the Pentagon delegation remained seated, sensing they were witnessing something beyond their clearance level. "Your name," the Admiral said, stopping 3 feet from Ivory. "Your full name." She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the Admiral's shoulder, a patch on Gunnery Sergeant Pierce's uniform, a specific designation that apparently meant something to her. "My name is Ivory Lawson," she said finally. "I'm a cleaning contractor." "You're lying." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody breathed. Even Rex had gone utterly still, his dark eyes moving between the two humans, as if watching a tennis match played at a frequency only he could perceive. Admiral Blake studied her face for a long moment. Then his attention dropped to her hands, to the small scars that marked her fingers like a roadmap of old injuries, to the calluses that shouldn't exist on someone who pushed mops for a living. "Your hands," he said quietly. "Those are handler's hands. Professional grade. Years of work with bite suits and combat harnesses." His gaze rose to meet hers. "You're K9, aren't you? Or you were." Ivory said nothing. "The dogs know." Blake gestured at Rex, still pressed against her leg. "Animals don't lie. They can't. Whatever you were, whatever you did, every canine on this facility recognizes you as Pack. That doesn't happen by accident." "Sir?" Commander Hayes stepped forward. "We conducted a background check. Her records are classified at level 5. I was told to stop asking questions." "You were told correctly." Blake's expression didn't change. "But that was before my best attack dog abandoned a demonstration to cuddle with the cleaning staff." He turned back to Ivory. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Who are you?" The moment stretched, expanded, became something crystalline and fragile. Then Derek Vance, impatient, embarrassed, determined to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his understanding, reached out and grabbed Ivory's jacket collar. "Answer the Admiral." He pulled. The fabric was old, worn, not designed to withstand the force of a man who spent his recreational hours in the gym. It tore with a sound like ripping paper, exposing Ivory's left shoulder and the flesh beneath. Time stopped. The tattoo covered her deltoid entirely, a detailed rendering of a 3-headed dog, each head facing a different direction. Cerberus, guardian of the underworld, rendered in black ink with geometric precision. Beneath the image, letters and numbers, K9 DevGru 07, and surrounding the designation, 7 stars arranged in a partial circle, 7 stars, each one representing something, someone. Master Sergeant Silas Turner was the first to react. The veteran handler had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the confrontation unfold with growing unease. Now his weathered face went pale. His hand trembled as it rose toward his forehead. "Phantom," he breathed. "You're Phantom." The name rippled through the assembled handlers like an earthquake. Whispers erupted. Phones appeared in hands, then disappeared just as quickly under the weight of military discipline. Gunnery Sergeant Logan Pierce stepped forward from the Pentagon delegation, his tablet forgotten, his marine composure cracking at the edges. "Operation Cerberus. You're the survivor, the only one who made it out of Kandahar." Admiral Blake hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on the tattoo, on the stars, on the woman who had spent 4 days cleaning kennels at a facility where her legend was taught in advanced handler courses. "Master Chief Petty Officer Ivory Lawson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of confirmation. "Call sign Phantom. DevGru K9 Division, inactive since 2015. Recipient of the Navy Cross, Bronze Star with Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts." He paused. "I signed your classification papers, myself, 10 years ago." The training yard had gone silent. 50 handlers, support staff, and Pentagon officials stood frozen in various stages of disbelief. Derek Vance still held the torn piece of jacket in his hand. His face had drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, Behind him, Lieutenant Amber Nash had pressed both hands over her mouth. Caleb Reeves had sunk to one knee, unable to support his own weight. Mason Briggs looked like he might be physically ill. Commander Hayes found his voice first. "Master Chief, we had no idea. You weren't supposed to." Ivory's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the yard. "That was the point." "But why?" Hayes spread his hands. "Why would someone with your record, your clearance, your reputation, why would you come here to clean kennels?" Ivory looked down at Rex. The Belgian Malinois hadn't moved from her side. His dark eyes gazed up at her with an expression that transcended canine intelligence. "Because these dogs," she said slowly, "are the children and grandchildren of the team that died saving my life 8 years ago. 12 handlers went into Kandahar, 6 came out." Her hand dropped to rest on Rex's head. 12 dogs went in, none of them came back. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications no one wanted to examine too closely. "The breeding program," Silas Turner said, understanding dawning. "We started it in 2016, using genetic material from the Cerberus casualties. Their sacrifice saved 12 SEALs who were trapped behind enemy lines." Ivory's fingers moved through Rex's fur with absent familiarity. "The dogs fought to the last breath, bought us time, took wounds that should have gone to their handlers." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was the only human who walked out of that compound, and I carried pieces of 7 friends home in body bags." Admiral Blake removed his cover and held it against his chest. Around him, every service member in attendance did the same. "The 7 stars," Pierce said softly. "Your team. My family." Ivory finally looked up, and for the first time since arriving at the facility, her eyes showed something other than patient neutrality. Pain lived there, old and deep and never fully healed. "I didn't come here for recognition. I came because this is the only place left where pieces of them still exist. The only place where I can still feel like they're not completely gone." She knelt beside Rex, bringing herself to his level. The Belgian Malinois whined and pressed closer, his powerful body radiating warmth against her side. "They know," she whispered, words meant for the dog, but audible to everyone. "Somehow, across 8 years and 2 generations, they know who I am. They remember." Her voice broke completely. "They remember, even when everyone else forgot." The silence that followed was not the uncomfortable quiet of social awkwardness. It was the reverent hush of a congregation bearing witness to something sacred. Admiral Blake broke it by doing something no one expected. He saluted. The gesture was crisp, perfect, the product of decades of military discipline. His hand rose to his brow with the precision of parade ground ceremony. "Master Chief Petty Officer Lawson," he said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, it is my profound honor to stand in your presence." One by one, the other service members followed suit. Commander Hayes, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, the colonels and captain from the Pentagon delegation. Even the civilian analyst, though his version was clearly improvised from half-remembered movies. Silas Turner held his salute longest, tears streaming openly down his weathered cheeks. The handlers who had tormented Ivory for 4 days stood apart from the formation. Derek Vance, Amber Nash, Caleb Reeves, Mason Briggs. They hadn't saluted, couldn't seem to remember how, their bodies frozen in attitudes of shock and dawning horror. The weight of what they'd done pressed down on them like a physical force. The broom thrown at her feet, the kennel locked with her inside, the public mockery and private cruelty. They had hazed a legend, humiliated a hero, treated a woman who had lost everything in service to her country like she was less than human. And she had let them. That realization that Ivory had possessed the knowledge, the authority, the connections to destroy their careers with a single phone call and had chosen silence instead was somehow the most devastating detail of all. Derek's knees buckled. He went down hard, combat boots scraping against concrete, his body refusing to support the weight of his shame. The torn piece of jacket slipped from his nerveless fingers. "Master Chief," he managed, his voice cracking like ice in spring. We didn't." "I know." Ivory rose smoothly, Rex moving with her like a shadow. "You didn't know. That doesn't excuse—" "No." She met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw not anger or contempt, but something worse, understanding. "It doesn't, but holding on to anger is a luxury I gave up in Kandahar, too heavy to carry alongside everything else." She stepped past him, walking toward the kennel blocks where 49 other dogs waited. Rex patted at her heel, his earlier aggression completely absent, replaced by the devoted attention of a canine who had found his purpose. Admiral Blake lowered his salute as she passed. Master Chief? Ivory paused. How long were you planning to stay? I hadn't decided. She didn't turn around. Long enough to see them, to know they were healthy and well-trained, and carrying on what their ancestors started. And now? The question hung in the morning air. Around the training yard, 50 dogs had begun to vocalize, not barking, but something softer, a sound that rippled from kennel to kennel like a message passed through generations. Now, Ivory said quietly, I suppose that depends on what happens next. She continued walking. The dog's chorus followed her, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost intentional, almost like a welcome or a promise. Behind her, the Pentagon evaluation had been completely forgotten. Admiral Blake was already reaching for his secure phone, his mind racing through implications and possibilities that would require conversations at levels most people didn't know existed. Commander Hayes dismissed the remaining handlers with a gesture. They dispersed in stunned silence, the morning's carefully planned demonstrations abandoned in favor of processing what they'd witnessed. Only Silas Turner remained at the reviewing stand, his salute finally lowered, his eyes still fixed on the small figure disappearing into Alpha Block. Phantom, he murmured to himself, testing the name like a word in a foreign language. After all this time, the legend had returned, and something told him that the story was just beginning. The hours following the revelation reorganized themselves around Ivory's presence, like iron filings around a magnet. Word spread through the facility with the speed of wildfire, from handler to support staff to security to medical, until everyone who wore a uniform or carried a badge knew the truth about their cleaning contractor. Master Chief Petty Officer Ivory Phantom Lawson, DevGru K9 Division, Operation Cerberus Survivor. The woman who had walked out of hell carrying 7 dog tags and an empty leash. Reactions varied by individual. Some handlers approached her with hesitant respect, offering awkward apologies for slights they had witnessed but not prevented. Others maintained their distance, unsure how to interact with someone whose service record read like a classified action movie. The dogs had no such uncertainty. Wherever Ivory walked, canines pressed against their kennel barriers with soft whines and wagging tails. The aggressive vocalizations that normally greeted strangers simply stopped. It was as if someone had flipped a switch in their collective consciousness, replacing guard dog programming with something older and deeper. Pack recognition, family reunion. Silas Turner found her in Bravo Block around 1400 hours, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor with 4 Belgian Malinois arranged around her like a protective detail. They weren't leashed, weren't commanded. They'd simply followed when she sat down and arranged themselves according to some internal protocol no human had taught them. May I? Silas gestured at an empty space on the floor. Ivory nodded without looking up. They won't mind. They know you're not a threat. He lowered himself carefully, joints protesting the position his 53-year-old body was too old to maintain comfortably. The nearest Malinois, a female named Storm, sniffed his hand once, then returned her attention to Ivory. I served with your predecessor, Silas said after a moment, Chief Masters. He was running the K9 program when I came through handler school in '94. Chief Masters trained me. Ivory's hand moved through fur in slow, methodical strokes. He said I had a gift, that the dogs could sense something in me they couldn't articulate. He called it the frequency. I remember him using that term, never understood what it meant. Neither did I, at first. She finally looked at him, and Silas was struck by how young she still seemed, despite everything in her file. Then I spent 18 months in the field, with handlers who are dead now, and dogs who gave everything they had, and I understood. What did you understand? That it's not about commanding them, not about domination or control or any of the things we teach in basic courses. Her voice dropped. It's about being willing to die for them, the same way they're willing to die for you. They can sense that commitment, feel it somehow, and once they know you'll go all the way, that you won't hesitate, won't flinch, won't ever put yourself above the pack, they'll follow you anywhere. Silas absorbed this in silence. Around them, the 4 Malinois had settled into various stages of relaxation, their breathing synchronized with Ivory's in a way that seemed almost mechanical. Operation Cerberus, he said carefully. The file is still classified. Most of us only know the basics. The basics are enough. Are they? Ivory's hand stilled on Storm's flank. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, We were sent to extract a high-value target from a compound in Kandahar province. Intelligence said minimal opposition, standard snatch and grab. Intelligence was wrong. Intelligence is always wrong. No bitterness in her voice, just statement of fact. They had us pinned within the first 5 minutes. 3 handler teams down before we reached the primary building. The dogs, they kept fighting even when their handlers fell. Bought us time we shouldn't have had. Silas had heard variations of this story before. The military was full of accounts of combat dogs protecting their handlers beyond all reason, beyond the instinct for self-preservation that governed most living creatures. The extraction team reached us around 0400, Ivory continued. By then, I was the only handler still breathing. The dogs, she swallowed. 11 of them formed a perimeter around the wounded SEALs we were protecting, held it for 6 hours against superior numbers. When the shooting finally stopped, they'd all... She didn't finish, didn't need to. You carried them out, Silas said softly. I carried what I could, tags, collars, photos. Her hand found the pocket of her jacket, the same pocket Shadow had alerted on days earlier. Small things, things that proved they existed, that they mattered. They mattered. Tell that to the families who never got closure. Tell that to the programs that got shut down because someone decided canine operations were too expensive, too complicated, too much liability. The edge in her voice was the first real emotion Silas had heard from her in 4 days. Tell that to the handlers who came after us and got pulled from the field because bureaucrats couldn't justify the budget. Is that why you disappeared after Cerberus? I didn't disappear. Ivory rose fluidly, the dogs mirroring her movement. I stepped back, took the medical discharge they offered, let them classify my file and pretend I didn't exist. But you came here. I came here because they built a breeding program from the genetic material of my team. She turned to face him fully. Storm's grandmother was a dog named Valkyrie. Valkyrie died covering my retreat through a breach in the compound wall. She took wounds that should have killed her instantly, but kept fighting for another 3 minutes. 3 minutes that saved 4 lives. Storm pressed against Ivory's leg, ears pricked forward. Now Valkyrie's granddaughter is standing here, and she knows. Ivory's voice dropped to a whisper. Somehow, across genetics and generations and 8 years of military breeding programs, she knows who I am and what her family did for mine. Silas found he had no words adequate to respond. I'm not here for recognition, Ivory continued, steel returning to her tone. I'm not here to reclaim glory or prove anything to anyone. I came because these dogs are the only family I have left, and I wanted to make sure someone was taking proper care of them. And are we? Taking proper care? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. You're training them to be weapons, Ivory said finally. That's the job. That's what they're bred for. But weapons break, Silas. They wear down. They need maintenance and care, and someone who sees them as more than tools. Is that what you saw here? Tools? I saw handlers who'd forgotten, or never learned, that these animals would die for them without hesitation. I saw a culture of dominance instead of partnership. She paused. And I saw a few people who understood. You, Fern, the Admiral. The Admiral knew who you were. He suspected. A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed her features. Solomon Blake was a captain when I came through advanced training. He signed off on my field certification. We haven't spoken in years, but some things you don't forget. Before Silas could respond, a commotion erupted near the main gate. Radio chatter spiked. Dogs throughout the facility began barking in patterns that suggested alarm rather than excitement. Ivory's posture shifted instantly. The relaxation of moments ago replaced by coiled alertness that transformed her entire bearing. What is it? Silas asked, scrambling to his feet. Perimeter alert. Her head tilted, processing sounds no ordinary person would have noticed. Eastern fence. Same section as 2 nights ago. That was a sensor malfunction. Was it? She was moving before he could answer. Storm and the other 3 Malinois falling into formation around her like a military escort. The dogs hadn't been commanded, hadn't been signaled. They simply knew what she needed and provided it. Silas followed, his mind racing through tactical possibilities while his instincts screamed that something was very, very wrong. The eastern perimeter revealed nothing obvious. Security personnel swept the fence line with flashlights, while handlers restrained dogs straining at their leashes. Whatever had triggered the sensors was either gone or never physically present. Admiral Blake had joined Commander Hayes at the mobile command post, their expressions grim in the floodlight glare. Second incident in 4 days, Blake was saying as Ivory approached. Same section of fence, same lack of evidence. Could be wildlife, Hayes offered. Deer have been known to. Deer don't trigger thermal sensors without leaving a heat signature. Blake turned as Ivory entered the command area. Master Chief, your assessment? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the fence line, Storm padding silently at her heel. Her eyes tracked the darkness beyond the perimeter lights, searching for something the others couldn't see. The dogs knew, she said finally, both times. They went quiet before the alarms triggered. Quiet how? Alert silence, pack behavior. They were tracking something. Tracking what? Ivory's hand found her jacket pocket. The challenge coin inside pressed against her palm. I don't know yet. She turned back to face the Admiral. But I'd suggest increasing patrols and implementing handler teams on the eastern approach. Whatever's out there, it's not wildlife. Blake studied her for a long moment. You think it's connected to you? I think I've learned not to believe in coincidences. The Admiral nodded slowly. Commander Hayes, implement the Master Chief's suggestions. I want this perimeter locked down until we understand what we're dealing with. Yes, sir. As the security team scrambled to comply, Ivory remained at the fence line, her silhouette stark against the floodlights. Storm pressed against her leg, the Malinois' attention fixed on the same darkness her handler studied. What are you looking at? Silas asked softly, joining her at the barrier. Ghosts, Ivory murmured. Or maybe something worse. Worse than ghosts? She didn't answer, but her hand never left that pocket, fingers wrapped around a coin that carried secrets she hadn't shared with anyone in 8 long years. Secrets that, if the eastern perimeter breach meant what she suspected, might not stay buried much longer. The night refused to yield its secrets. Security teams swept the eastern perimeter until 0300 hours, finding nothing but shadows and the restless stirring of 50 dogs who sensed what their human counterparts could not detect. Ivory didn't sleep. She spent those dark hours walking the kennel blocks, Storm trailing behind her like a 4-legged shadow. Each dog she passed received a moment of attention, a touch, a word, a silent acknowledgement that transcended the barrier of species. By the time dawn painted the Virginia coast in shades of pink and gold, something had shifted in the facility's atmosphere. The handlers who arrived for morning duty moved differently, spoke differently, looked at the cleaning contractor with new eyes that held equal parts reverence and shame. Derek Vance found her in Alpha Block at 0630. He stood at the entrance for a full minute before she acknowledged his presence, her attention focused on Rex's coat as she brushed matted fur with practiced strokes. Master Chief. The title felt foreign in his mouth. Wrong, somehow, for a woman he'd thrown a broom at 4 days earlier. Chief Vance. She didn't look up. I need to... He stopped, started again. What I did, what we all did, there's no excuse. No, there isn't. The blunt agreement hit harder than any rebuke. Derek had prepared himself for anger, for recrimination, for the justified fury of a superior officer who'd been disrespected in ways that should end careers. This quiet acceptance was infinitely worse. I've submitted my resignation, he said. Commander Hayes has it on his desk. The brushing stopped. Ivory turned, and for the first time since his arrival, she looked directly at him. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in the depths of her eyes. Why? Because I failed. His voice cracked on the word. Not just you, everyone. The Giza, the program, everything Chief Masters built and everything you sacrificed to protect. He swallowed hard. I became exactly the kind of handler I swore I'd never be. Arrogant, dismissive, so convinced of my own importance that I couldn't see what was standing right in front of me. And resignation fixes that? It's accountability. No. Ivory set down the brush and rose to face him fully. Resignation is escape. It's walking away from the mess you made instead of cleaning it up. Derek's jaw tightened. With respect, Master Chief, I don't see how. You're a good handler. The words stopped him cold. Your technique is solid. Your dogs respond well. You understand the fundamentals better than half the instructors I worked with in DevGru. Then why? Because somewhere along the way, you forgot that being skilled doesn't make you superior. You started seeing yourself as the master instead of the partner. She stepped closer, her small frame somehow commanding the space between them. That's not a fatal flaw, Chief. That's a lesson you haven't learned yet. How do I learn it? By staying, by doing the work, by remembering every single time you look at a new recruit or a civilian contractor that you have no idea what they've survived to stand in front of you. The silence stretched between them like a bridge being built one plank at a time. My resignation, Derek said finally. You want me to withdraw it? I want you to earn the right to keep wearing that uniform. That means facing what you did, not running from it. He nodded slowly, the motion carrying the weight of a vow. Yes, Master Chief. And Derek? She waited until his eyes met hers. The next time you see someone you think it is beneath you, remember this moment. Remember how wrong you were about me. Then ask yourself what else you might be wrong about. She returned to Rex, the conversation apparently concluded. Derek stood frozen for several heartbeats, processing the unexpected mercy he had been granted. Then he turned and walked toward Commander Hayes' office to retrieve his resignation letter. The morning brought consequences that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Lieutenant Amber Nash requested a transfer to administrative duties, unable to meet the eyes of handlers who'd witnessed her treatment of Ivory. Her request was denied pending a formal review of her conduct. Petty Officer First Class Caleb Reeves approached Ivory during the mid-morning break, his earlier arrogance completely absent. He didn't speak, couldn't seem to find words adequate to the task. But he knelt beside her as she examined a young Malinois' teeth and simply observed, learning, absorbing, beginning the long process of unlearning everything he'd assumed about dominance and control. Mason Briggs was the hardest case. He found Ivory alone in the equipment shed around 1100 hours, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The memory of locking her in Titan's kennel sat between them like a physical presence. I could have killed you. His voice was barely audible. That first day, when I locked the door, if Titan had attacked, he wouldn't have. You didn't know that. Yes. Ivory sorted through a box of training equipment, her movements unhurried. I did. How? How could you possibly? Because I've spent more time with military working dogs than I've spent with humans. She pulled out a worn leather leash and examined it. I know their body language, their warning signs, their tells. Titan wasn't aggressive in that kennel. He was afraid. Afraid of what? Of himself. Of what he might do if someone pushed him too far. She met Mason's eyes. Sound familiar? The young petty officer flinched as if struck. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, Ivory continued. What you did was cruel and potentially lethal. You used your position to terrorize someone you perceived as perilous. I know, but I'm also not going to destroy your career over it. She set down the leash. You remind me of someone I knew once. Same chip on the shoulder, same need to prove himself by pushing others down. Who? Me, 20 years ago. The admission seemed to cost her something. I was angry and scared, and convinced that the only way to survive was to make sure everyone else knew their place beneath me. What changed? I met the dogs. A ghost of a smile crossed her features. They don't care about rank or posturing or who has more ribbons on their chest. They respond to authenticity, to the person underneath all the armor we build. Mason was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to be that person. Then learn. That's what this program is supposed to teach. She picked up her equipment and moved toward the door. Start by apologizing to Fern Cooper. She was terrified when she found me in that kennel. She thought she was going to witness a mauling. She saved you. She tried to. That matters more than you might think. Ivory left him standing in the equipment shed, the weight of his choices pressing down on shoulders that seemed suddenly too narrow to carry them. Admiral Blake remained at the facility through the morning, conducting meetings that weren't listed on any official schedule. By noon, he'd assembled a group in Commander Hayes' conference room that included Ivory, Silas Turner, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, and Chief Warrant Officer Ezra Dalton. What I'm about to discuss doesn't leave this room. Blake's tone carried the gravity of classification levels most people never encountered. Is that understood? Nods around the table. Master Chief Lawson's presence here isn't coincidental. The Admiral pulled a folder from his briefcase. Actual paper, Ivory noted, not digital files that could be hacked or traced. 3 months ago, we received intelligence suggesting that details of Operation Cerberus had been compromised. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Compromised how? Hayes asked. Names, locations, tactical details that were never supposed to exist outside of secure facilities. Blake opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents covered in redaction marks. Someone has been selling information about our canine operations to foreign actors, not just Cerberus, multiple missions spanning the last decade. The perimeter breaches, Ivory said quietly. We believe they're connected. Blake nodded. This facility houses the descendants of the Cerberus dogs. More importantly, it houses the breeding records and genetic databases that make our canine program unique. That information in the wrong hands could compromise years of operational security. You think someone is trying to access the facility? I think someone already has. The Admiral's eyes found Ivory's. The first breach occurred 2 days after you arrived. The second, 4 days later. Either that's coincidence, or someone is very interested in your presence here. Silas leaned forward. Master Chief, do you have any idea who might be targeting you specifically? Ivory's hand found her jacket pocket. The challenge coin inside had never felt heavier. The 7 stars on my tattoo, she said slowly. 6 of them represent handlers who died at Cerberus, but there were 7 of us on that mission. 7 handlers? Pierce checked his tablet. The official record shows 6 casualties. The official record is incomplete. Ivory withdrew the coin from her pocket and placed it on the table. The design was visible now, the same 3-headed dog as her tattoo, surrounded by text too small to read at a distance. This belonged to the 7th handler, call sign Echo. Echo survived Cerberus? Echo was reported killed during the initial breach. Body never recovered. We assumed... She paused. I assumed he died with the others. The extraction team found dog tags but no remains. You think Echo is alive? I think someone wants me to believe Echo is alive. Ivory pushed the coin toward the center of the table. I found this in my apartment 3 months ago. No note, no explanation. Just the coin, placed on my pillow while I was sleeping. Admiral Blake picked up the coin, examining it with narrowed eyes. This is authentic. These were only issued to handlers who completed DevGru K9 advanced training. Echo completed training 6 months before I did. He was the best handler I ever worked with. If he survived Cerberus... Ivory shook her head. If he survived and never contacted anyone in 8 years, there's a reason. And that reason probably isn't good. You came here because you thought he might make contact. I came here because this facility is the only connection left to what happened in Kandahar. If Echo is alive, if he's been compromised or turned or simply lost, this is where he'd eventually appear. The implications settled over the room like a shroud. So, we have a potential asset or threat with intimate knowledge of our most sensitive canine operations, possibly working with foreign actors, and definitely monitoring this facility. Hayes rubbed his temples. Wonderful. What do you need from us, Master Chief? Blake asked. Time and access. Ivory retrieved the coin, returning it to her pocket. If Echo is out there, he'll make contact eventually. When he does, I want to be ready. And if he's hostile, then I'll deal with it. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had faced worse odds and survived. He was my teammate, my friend. Whatever he's become, I owe him the chance to explain before anyone else gets involved. Blake studied her for a long moment, weighing risks and protocols and decades of military experience against the simple humanity of the request. You have 48 hours, he said finally. After that, this becomes an official investigation with all the complications that entails. Understood, sir. And Master Chief? The Admiral's expression softened slightly. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. Not anymore. Ivory nodded, but her eyes had already drifted toward the window, toward the eastern perimeter, toward shadows that might conceal ghosts or enemies or something in between. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity that masked the tension thrumming beneath the facility's surface. Handlers ran their dogs through extended drills. Security personnel conducted additional sweeps. And Ivory Lawson walked the kennel blocks with 50 pairs of eyes tracking her every movement. Fern Cooper caught up with her near Charlie Block, slightly out of breath from jogging across the compound. I heard about what happened this morning, with Vance and the others. Ivory continued walking. News travels fast. It's a small facility. Fern fell into step beside her. People are saying you convinced Derek to stay, that you're not pressing charges against Mason, that you've been forgiving. Forgiveness is a strong word. What would you call it? Ivory stopped beside a kennel housing a young German shepherd named Apollo. The dog pressed against the barrier, tail wagging, eyes bright with recognition. I'd call it perspective. She knelt to scratch Apollo's ears through the chain link. 8 years ago, I watched 6 friends die in my arms. I carried their bodies to a helicopter that shouldn't have reached us in time. I spent 18 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again after the wounds I took. Fern was silent, waiting. During that time, I had a lot of opportunities to be angry, to blame the intelligence officers who gave us bad information, to blame the command structure that put us in an impossible position, to blame myself for surviving when better people didn't. Ivory's voice remained steady, but something in her posture had shifted. I chose not to. Why? Because anger is heavy, and I was already carrying enough. She stood, giving Apollo one final pat. The people who hurt me this week, Derek, Amber, Caleb, Mason, they're not villains. They're humans who made mistakes. The same kind of mistakes I've made. The same kind everyone makes when they forget that the world is full of stories they'll never know. That's very philosophical. That's very practical. A genuine smile flickered across Ivory's features. Carrying grudges takes energy. I'd rather spend that energy on things that matter, like the dogs, like the handlers who want to learn, like making sure that the next generation of K9 teams doesn't repeat the mistakes that got my team killed. Fern absorbed this in silence. Then, Commander Hayes mentioned you've been offered a position here, official consultant to the training program. He mentioned it. Are you going to take it? Ivory's gaze swept across the kennel blocks, taking in the rows of dogs and handlers and the entire ecosystem of training and discipline that represented Naval Special Warfare's K9 program. I haven't decided yet. There's something I need to resolve first. Before Fern could ask what that something was, the facility's alarm system erupted into screaming life. Not the perimeter alert from previous nights. This was the full facility lockdown. 3 long blasts followed by continuous tone, indicating an active threat on the grounds. Ivory was moving before the first alarm cycle completed. The chaos that followed would later be reconstructed from security footage, handler reports, and the confused accounts of personnel who couldn't quite explain what they'd witnessed. At 17:42 hours, an unidentified individual breached the eastern fence line. Unlike previous incidents, this breach was unmistakable, a clean cut through the chain link, professional grade, executed with tools that didn't exist in civilian markets. Security responded within 90 seconds, converging on the breach point with weapons drawn. They found nothing. The intruder had vanished into the facility's interior, moving with a speed and skill that suggested extensive training. Commander Hayes coordinated from the operations center, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I want handler teams on every block. Lock down the kennels. Nobody in or out until we've swept the entire facility. Sir, the dogs are going crazy. Derek Vance's voice crackled over the radio. They're not responding to commands. What do you mean not responding? I mean they're ignoring everything. All of them. They're focused on something else. Hayes pulled up the kennel camera feeds and felt his blood run cold. 50 military working dogs stood at attention in their individual enclosures. Not barking, not pacing, standing perfectly still, every head oriented in the same direction. Toward Alpha Block. Toward Ivory Lawson, who stood alone in the center of the compound, with her arms at her sides and her eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the floodlights. Master Chief, Hayes' voice carried through the facility's PA system. Get to the bunker, now! She didn't move. Master Chief Lawson, that is a direct order. We have an active threat on... I know. Her voice was calm, impossibly calm given the circumstances. He's here. Who's here? The shadows at the edge of the floodlit zone shifted, coalesced, became a figure that stepped into the light with the measured confidence of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The man was perhaps 40 years old, lean and weathered in ways that suggested decades of hard living. He wore civilian clothes, dark jacket, cargo pants, boots that looked military surplus. His face was partially obscured by a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months, but his eyes were unmistakable. Hello, Phantom. His voice carried across the compound, rough with disuse. It's been a while. Echo. The name emerged from Ivory's lips like a prayer, like a curse. You're supposed to be dead. I've been a lot of things. He moved closer, his gait revealing the slight limp of someone carrying old injuries. Dead, missing, forgotten. Seems like you're the only one who remembers the truth. What is the truth? That I didn't die in Kandahar, that I've spent 8 years trying to find out who sold us to the enemy, who gave our positions to the people who killed our team. His hands remained visible, palms forward, a gesture of non-aggression that Ivory recognized from countless tactical scenarios. And I found them. Who? Echo's smile was bitter. Was bitter. That's what I came to tell you. Commander Hayes' voice boomed through the PA system. Unidentified individual, get on the ground with your hands visible. Security teams, prepare to engage. No, Ivory's command cut through this chaos. Stand down. Master Chief, he breached our perimeter. He's one of us. She turned to face the operations center, her small frame somehow commanding attention from every person on the facility. He's one of ours, and I'm taking responsibility for whatever happens next. The standoff lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Security personnel with weapons trained on the intruder, Ivory standing between them like a human shield. Echo frozen in the floodlights, with that bitter smile still twisting his lips. Admiral Blake's voice came over the radio, calm and authoritative. Security teams, lower your weapons. Let the Master Chief handle this. The tension didn't dissipate. It transformed. Weapons lowered but remained ready. Personnel held their positions but watched with a new quality of attention. You owe me an explanation. Ivory faced Echo fully. 8 years of silence. 8 years of thinking you died in my arms. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I know exactly what it did. His voice cracked. I watched, from a distance. I saw you go through rehab, saw you take the discharge, saw you disappear into civilian life and try to forget everything we were. Then why? Why didn't you reach out? Because the people who betrayed us were still active. Because reaching out would have put you in danger. Because... He stopped, and for the first time since emerging from the shadows, emotion broke through his carefully maintained composure. Because I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Of surviving. Of running when I should have stayed and fought. Of leaving you to carry bodies that should have included mine. The words hung in the night air, heavy with 8 years of guilt and grief. I didn't run. Echo's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was captured. Held for 3 days before I escaped. By the time I got back to friendly lines, the extraction was complete, and you were in surgery, fighting for your life. Why didn't you report in? Because I'd seen things. Heard things. The people who ambushed us knew our positions, our timing, our extraction routes. They knew because someone told them. Who? Echo shook his head. Not here, not like this. I have documentation, years of evidence, but the people involved are powerful, connected. If I reveal what I know in the wrong circumstances, then we go somewhere safe. Ivory took a step toward him. Come inside. Let Admiral Blake hear what you have. Let the system work. The system is compromised. His voice hardened. Don't you understand? I've spent 8 years proving that. The leak goes higher than anyone wants to believe. Then we burn it down together, the way we should have from the beginning. Brother and sister in arms, separated by years and lies, finally standing close enough to touch. The compound held its breath, waiting for a resolution that seemed impossible. Echo's resistance crumbled in stages. First the tension in his shoulders, then the defensive set of his jaw. Finally, the wall behind his eyes that had protected him through 8 years of lonely investigation. You always were the stubborn one, he said quietly. Someone had to be. A sound interrupted them, not human, but canine. A whine that started in Alpha Block and spread kennel by kennel until 50 dogs were vocalizing in unison. Not barking, not aggressive, something more primal, recognition. They know you. Ivory glanced toward the kennel blocks. The same way they knew me. Their ancestors saved my life too. Echo's voice was thick. In Kandahar, after I was captured. When I escaped, it was one of our dogs who found me in the desert and led me to safety. Which one? Reaper. The name was a reverent whisper. He was wounded but still moving, still fighting. He stayed with me for 2 days until I reached friendly territory. Died in my arms 1/2 mile from the extraction point. Ivory's eyes went to Rex's kennel, where the Belgian Malinois stood pressed against the barrier, his dark eyes fixed on Echo, with an intensity that transcended ordinary canine awareness. Rex is Reaper's grandson, she said, 2nd generation, same lineage. Echo followed her gaze, and something in his expression shattered. He looks just like him. They all do. In different ways, different combinations, but the bloodline is there, the memory. Is that why you came here? To see what was left of them? I came here because I was tired of being alone, tired of pretending that part of my life didn't exist. Ivory reached out and took his hand, the first physical contact they'd had in 8 years. I came because family is supposed to be together. Echo gripped her hand like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. The moment was interrupted by Admiral Blake approaching with Commander Hayes at his side. Security personnel maintained their positions, but their weapons were holstered, the immediate crisis apparently resolved. Master Chief, Blake's voice carried professional courtesy with an undertone of genuine concern. I assume you can explain what's happening here. Admiral, this is Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, call sign Echo. DevGru K9 Division, same team as me. Ivory didn't release Echo's hand. He survived Kandahar and has spent the last 8 years investigating the intelligence leak that compromised our mission. Webb was declared killed in action. Webb was declared a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Blake studied the newcomer with eyes that had evaluated threats for 4 decades. Chief Webb, you breached a secure military facility. You've been operating outside the chain of command for 8 years. You have approximately 60 seconds to convince me you're not an enemy combatant. Echo met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. Sir, I have documentation proving that our mission in Kandahar was deliberately compromised by someone within DevGru command structure. Names, dates, financial transactions, communications intercepts, everything you need to identify and prosecute the people responsible for killing my team. And you couldn't bring this through proper channels? With respect, sir, the proper channels are compromised. That's the whole point. Blake was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Hayes. Commander, have your people stand down. Chief Webb will be taken to the secure briefing room for debriefing. Master Chief Lawson, you'll accompany him. Yes, sir. And Webb? The Admiral's voice hardened. If I find out you're lying, if any of this is fabrication or misdirection, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in a cell so deep they'll have to pump sunlight to you. Are we clear? Crystal, sir. The procession that formed, Admiral, Commander, 2 veterans of a mission that had never officially happened, surrounded by security personnel whose confusion was evident in every step, made its way toward the administration building. Behind them, 50 dogs finally broke their silence, not barking, not howling, something that could only be described as singing, a harmonic vocalization that rose from every kennel simultaneously and filled the night air with sound that seemed almost otherworldly. They sang as the handlers who'd almost destroyed their connection walked past. They sang for the reunion they'd somehow known was coming. They sang for family, the pact that death and distance and 8 years of separation had failed to break. The debriefing lasted through the night and into the following morning. Echo's documentation was everything he'd promised and more, a meticulously assembled case that implicated figures whose names made Admiral Blake's face go pale with recognition. By 0800, secure calls were being made to offices in Washington that didn't appear on any organizational chart. By noon, investigators were en route. By evening, the first arrests would be made in what would eventually become the largest internal security breach in DevGru history. But that was politics. That was justice. That was the system finally working the way it was supposed to. What mattered more, what Ivory would remember long after the investigations concluded and the perpetrators faced trial, was the moment in the kennel block at dawn. Echo knelt beside Rex's enclosure, his hand pressed against the chain link, as the Belgian Malinois pressed back from the other side. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The conversation happening between man and dog transcended words. He knows you, Ivory said softly. He knows what I was. Echo's voice was rough with emotion. What we all were. What his family died protecting. The breeding program was designed to preserve their genetics, their capabilities. No one expected it would preserve this. Maybe that's the part that matters most. Echo looked up at her. The part that can't be quantified or measured or put into training manuals. The connection. Ivory nodded slowly. Commander Hayes offered me a position here, she said. Official consultant. Rebuilding the handler training program from the ground up. Are you going to take it? I think I have to. She looked out over the kennel blocks, at the 50 dogs who'd known her on sight, who'd protected her with their silence, who'd sung when Echo emerged from the darkness. They need someone who understands what they're carrying, someone who can teach the handlers that these aren't weapons. They're partners, family. Their legacy, Echo added, everything we built, everything we lost, everything that survived because these animals refused to let it die. Will you stay? Help me? The question hung between them, weighted with 8 years of separation and the complicated dance of reconnection. I don't know if I can. Echo's voice was honest. I've spent so long running, investigating, surviving. I don't know if I remember how to stay. Then learn. Ivory echoed the words she'd spoken to Derek Vance the morning before. That's what this program is supposed to teach. Echo was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, a genuine smile broke through the weathered exhaustion of his features. You always were the stubborn one. Someone had to be. If this story moved you, I have a favor to ask. Share it with someone who appreciates military heroes and the bonds they form with their canine partners. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that bell so you never miss stories like this. The video on screen right now features another incredible military story I think you'll love. Thank you for staying until the end. You're the reason this channel exists. 3 weeks passed. The investigations concluded with convictions that it would remain classified for decades. Admiral Blake received a commendation he couldn't talk about. Commander Hayes was promoted to a position that officially didn't exist. And Naval Special Warfare Canine Training Facility in Virginia Beach quietly became something more than it had been. The new curriculum bore Ivory's fingerprints on every page. Handler training now included sections on pack psychology, non-dominance leadership, and the ethical responsibilities of partnering with animals who would die for you without hesitation. The phrase, "They're not tools, they're teammates," became something approaching a facility motto. Derek Vance completed his remedial training and returned to handler duties with a humility that his previous self wouldn't have recognized. Amber Nash transferred out, unable to face the daily reminder of her failures. Caleb Reeves became one of Ivory's most dedicated students, his technical challenger attitude redirected toward constructive improvement. Mason Briggs apologized to every person he'd wronged and started volunteering at the facility's veterinary clinic on his off hours. Silas Turner retired with full honors, passing his responsibilities to a new generation of handlers who'd been taught by a legend they had almost overlooked. Echo remained. Not officially, his status was too complicated for standard personnel files, but as a shadow presence who appeared during training exercises and vanished between debriefings. His relationship with Ivory rebuilt itself one conversation at a time, two survivors learning to be family again after years of thinking the other was gone forever. And the dogs. The 50 military working dogs who'd known both handlers on site continued to demonstrate behaviors that defied conventional explanation. Rex followed Ivory through the facility like a personal bodyguard. Storm attached herself to Echo with equal devotion. The others distributed their attention according to some internal logic that no trainer could predict or control. They were pack. They were legacy. They were proof that some bonds transcended genetics and training and the cold mathematics of military breeding programs. On the evening of Ivory's third week as official consultant, she stood alone in Alpha Block, watching the sun set over the Virginia coast. The day's training had gone well, handlers responding to new techniques, dogs performing above baseline, the entire program slowly transforming into something that honored its origins. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The message was from an unknown number. No caller ID, no identifying information. Just 4 words. The 8th star waits. Ivory stared at the screen, her pulse accelerating despite years of training that should have kept it steady. 7 stars on her tattoo. 6 handlers dead. Echo survived. Who was the 8th? Her fingers moved automatically, typing a response she'd never expected to send. Who is this? The reply came immediately. You know who. Kandahar wasn't the end. It was the beginning. More soon. Then silence. Ivory pocketed the phone and turned to face the kennel blocks. Rex was watching her, through the chain link, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. What do you know, boy? She murmured. What else is out there? Rex whined softly and pressed against the barrier. In the distance, Echo emerged from the administration building, his silhouette familiar and strange at the same time. He raised a hand in greeting, unaware of the message that had just arrived, unaware that the mission they thought was finished might have only begun. Ivory raised her hand in return. Whatever came next, whatever secrets still lurked in the shadows of their shared past, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Echo. She had the handlers who'd learned to see beyond their assumptions. She had 50 dogs whose ancestors had died protecting her and whose descendants would do the same without hesitation. She had family. And family, as she'd learned in a compound in Kandahar 8 years ago, was worth any sacrifice. The sun dipped below the horizon. The facility's lights flickered to life, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, a truth waited to be uncovered, one that would change everything, again. Rex howled once, a long, mournful note that echoed across the compound, and was answered by 49 other voices in perfect harmony. They knew something was coming. They always did, and when it arrived, they would be ready, together. This story carries a powerful message that resonates far beyond the military setting. Ivory Lawson walked into that facility as a cleaning lady, endured mockery and humiliation, yet never once demanded recognition or respect. She let her actions speak louder than any medal or rank ever could. The first lesson is simple but profound. Never judge anyone by their appearance or position. The person mopping your floors might have sacrificed more than you can imagine. The quiet colleague in the corner office might carry wounds invisible to the naked eye. Every human being has a story worth hearing if we take the time to listen. The second lesson speaks to the nature of true leadership. Ivory had every right to destroy the careers of those who mistreated her. Instead, she chose to teach. She transformed enemies into students and shame into growth. That is the mark of genuine strength. Not the power to punish, but the wisdom to rebuild. The third lesson is about loyalty that transcends time and distance. 50 Dogs recognized Ivory not because of training, but because of something deeper, a bond passed down through generations. Family is not always blood. Sometimes family is forged in fire and preserved through love. If this story moved you, carry its message forward. Look at the people around you with fresh eyes. Treat everyone with dignity regardless of their title. And remember that the quietest person in the room might just be the strongest warrior you will ever meet. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.